sun had already set in the City of Lights, and it was cold. The kind of cold that made the sweat sting your face and your clenched muscles beg for mercy. "Paris," he started to say to no one in particular, his eyes following the trail of smoke from the last few flakes of tobacco in his unfiltered coffin nail. His name was Hussein, and at 35 he'd already spent a lifetime getting punched around by life like a sack of cheap cuts. A regular Joe who came to Paris to put his past behind him. He'd taken a job as a nighttime hack. It gave him a lot of time alone, and that was the way he liked it. One night, he had a surprise date with a serial killer's blade that left him for dead. 2 surgeries, and a month later, he was back in his cab, watching a sea of faces ripple through his mind. The passengers, some friends, some strangers whose details were faded. One of them had tried to kill him. He was on the hook to help the cops figure out who it was, or be locked up himself. Maybe the surgeons hadn't done him a favor.
Nightcall is a visual novel game, a kind of choose-your-own-adventure book set in modern-day Paris. In it, you play as Hussein, a graveyard shift taxi driver forced to assist police in the investigation of a serial killer, one with whom he himself had a near-fatal brush. Depending on which story you pick, the killer might be named the Judge, the Angel of Death, or the Sandman, but the format is always the same. Get assaulted and left for dead by the serial killer. Drive around town looking for clues and evidence, either at specific locations or gathered through conversation with your customers. You'll have to balance delivering patrons to their destinations and playing detective, as you've got bills to pay and a gas tank to fill. Once back at your apartment, you'll organize your evidence and the clues you've gathered until you can narrow down the field of suspects to a most likely candidate. At the end of the week, you must accuse a single subject. Then aid in the capture. First, the bad news. The clues gathering and money-earning aspects kind of feel tacked on, almost as if they were put there solely to serve as vehicles to justify the taxicab confessions phase. It's cool that if you replay a story, the guilty suspect might change, but it still feels pretty shallow. But now for the very good news. Those taxicab confessions sections are extraordinarily good. The passengers you meet are genuinely fascinating, presenting well-written, impactful stories that often play out over several trips. It's these conversations that form the true heart and soul of Nightcall. Their stories range from the fantastic, like Santa Claus after a night of revelry returning to his sleigh, someone strongly reminiscent of Jim Morrison returning to the Père Lachaise cemetery, a young man who fancies himself a crime fighter, to the heartbreaking, a woman finding herself running from loneliness only to find more at every turn, a foreign student feeling like an outcast and longing to go home, a girl chasing her dream against her parents' pressure. If the stories are Nightcall's heart and soul, the themes of loneliness, facing the consequences of one's own choices, and ultimately oneself are its blood. On more than one occasion, after only 5 minutes of conversation, I was left sitting and thinking after the passenger left my cab. They're that well written. Each passenger has his or her story tracked in what's called a Passadex. It's kind of like a Pokédex full of sullen Parisians. It tracks the real-world date when you unlocked the different passengers and when you unlocked each phase of their related storylines. The game itself seems to acknowledge that these stories are the strong point, as there's a free roaming option in the main menu, allowing you to drive around town in an endless mode. The main reason for doing this is to continue to fill up your Passadex, as it's persistent across all modes and sessions. Now, a little side note here. Since the Passadex is persistent across stories and playthroughs, it does lead one to a very uncomfortable observation. That Hussein has, in reality, been assaulted by 3 different killers, and has lived through the exact same traumatic course of events 3 separate times. He seriously needs to find another line of work. By the way, although the game allows for 3 difficulties, against the norm I'd suggest playing it in story mode. It's not that balanced is difficult, it isn't. but the money-earning aspect simply isn't fun, meaningful, or necessary. In my opinion, you'll end up playing for the story, not the resource management. So let's talk about the graphics. Well, the art and animation style is dark, angular, and moody, as you can see here. Every scene is blanketed in harsh shadows and stark highlights. It screams film noir, and the few animated segments do exceptionally well in conveying a sense of solitude and despair. But let's talk about the Xbox version. Well, there are several graphic issues. Screen tearing is pretty evident even on the One X, and it's just begging for a VSync option. There's also a hard chromatic aberration applied that some people, like me, find very distracting. It's supposed to emulate a camera, and what is the camera filming? The drawings? It doesn't make sense here at all. Screen transitions and set pieces don't always make sense and feel kind of randomized and only peripherally attached to what's being discussed or to a scene's progression. Similarly, many quality of life issues were plainly evident. For example, being able to access a player's Passadex menu from the navigation screen would be amazing, and it may in some way be possible, but I couldn't find it. The on-screen navigation hints, legends, and tooltips are, well, minimalist. So if you're interested in a first-rate interactive novel, grab Nightcall. Its stories will enthrall you with writing so biting, well-defined, and clever, you won't speed through the text. Monkey Moon's writers, and those who provided the English translations, deserve a huge bonus for their efforts. Their work carries the product. Nightcall was created as a joint venture between the developers at Monkey Moon and the artists at Black Muffin Studios. Already out on PC and console for around $19.99, you can play it on Xbox Game Pass for free. Being only the price of a good novel still makes it worth the buy. So that's our review of Nightcall. If you've played it, what was your experience? Please leave a comment below and let us know. Also, feel free to add any questions or suggestions. And if you enjoyed this video, please consider liking it and subscribing. It would be greatly appreciated and really helps a lot. Thanks for watching.